I'm Lee, and this is RT Talks. We're talking with Ginny Loveday today about solo creator burnout. If you're listening live, we will have community questions answered at the end and throughout the talk. Look to RT Discussion to leave your questions. So, Ginny, lovely to have you. How are you doing today?
I am doing well, a little frazzled because I have been on the road and I came in the door, having been delayed at the crossing of the border from Canada directly before this started, everyone. So speaking of overcommitting yourself, hello, hi, it's me, I'm the problem.
Deeply relatable. And now overcommitment, that's an interesting topic, but I know that you have something you'd like to send to here first, which is if there is one thing that anyone is taking away from this talk, what would you say the most important part of avoiding burnout is?
You know, the most important part of avoiding burnout in any industry is learning how to say no, which is very hard because it feels bad sometimes. You have a project and they're like, do you want to work on this Feywild inspired thing? And you're like, oh man, Feywild is my jam. And then you look at your calendar and you're like, okay, so I have this deadline here and this one 2 weeks after and this one a month after. And they said that this one fits in between those last two. So I got 2 weeks in between each one. Let me tell you, 2 weeks is not a lot of time to do any creative work. So, you know, you're looking at it and you're like, I could squeeze it in. You can, sure. But it's not going to be great work. You're not going to feel great. You're going to feel rushed. And it's a lot better to say, gosh, you know, I am really flattered and I absolutely love this project. And if the timeline were a little bit different, my availability opens up on X date, I would love to be involved. So, you know, if something is delayed on the project, definitely hit me back up. But otherwise, you know, I got to pass right now. It's hard, though, to get to that point because you want to do the fun things. And you want to do all of them, especially as you're just getting started in the industry, becoming a solo creator, right? Because you want to do more things. You want to do all of the things because you want people to see what you've done, that you've got, you know, this breadth of skills, range of, you know, abilities and knowledge, and that you want to get as much stuff out as quickly as possible. Obviously, right? That's what everyone tells you to do. Publish more, publish more, publish more. So that, you know, you have a catalog of stuff that people can look at. And you're like, okay, I need to do it all right now. But gosh, you take on that much stuff and you start hating it. And then you start hating yourself.
Very true.
And, you know, that's the part where things start to unravel very quickly. And Lee, I'm sure you've been there too, because you've got your thing, like you said, all your diesel shots. And I'm sure anyone who's created, whether it's like publishing or whatnot, or even just like, I don't know, if we all go back to when we were teenagers, varying lengths of time ago that may be, you wanted to do every single extracurricular activity that existed. Or if you were an introvert, you wanted to read every book that existed, play every game that existed, but you can't do it all at the same time.
And then you start doing it in class, you're telling myself, oh, I can catch up with it. Oh, don't worry, there are notes. It's just one day. And there's that debt that accrues over all of your time and your availability and your emotional connection to it. I mean, you actually mentioned hating what you do. And I have a personal theory, and maybe this is a bit grim, so as a system designer, I have never finished a game that I have not hated by the end. And part of me doesn't think it's finished until I do. That's not a good thought. I'm not encouraging people to have it. But overall, I definitely think it's a symptom of burnout and burning out on these things that we love, that we feel driven to do, that are part of who we are and what we're doing with our lives. And that brings us to this dangerous dance with burnout that affects us, because you mentioned with saying no, it's a call to do something you want to do, that you like to do, but if you take all these calls, it burns you.
And it's hard to say no when somebody's like, oh, this is my dream project, and they've handed it to you. But, you know, like I said, the important thing there is you are saying no. You need to say no. But like letting them know that like you love it, you want to do it, it's just the timeline doesn't work for you.
Absolutely.
You really need to learn what is your feasible pace of work, something that is sustainable. Can you write 5,000 good words every single day? Absolutely not. If anybody's told you that they can do that, ask them to see their 5,000 words they've written consecutively for 7 days.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, obviously, we're not all critics, so you're not going to be able to judge like objectively if they're good. But, everyone has their opinions, and like the majority tends to fall along a nice bell curve of what we like.
Yeah.
So you'd know, if I write 5,000 words every day, 60% of them are going to be garbage.
Absolutely. I mean, I wrote 10 grand the other day and I was reading back through it and I was like, oh no, Leland, what were you doing? Because I was, pushing to meet a deadline. And this is going to get ironed out because there's an editor and everything with this project. But absolutely, just because you've done it once and it was pretty good that time does not mean clocking in 5 to 7 days a week, getting that out there.
It's the sustainability part of it, right? Yeah. And you see it a lot too in the video game world when they talk about crunch, right? So that sounds like exactly what you were doing. You cranked it out, you had that deadline, and those of us who are chronic procrastinators, not that I'm calling each of you out individually, but we know who we are. You're like, nothing motivates me like a deadline. And yeah, that's true frequently. I find that to be true as well. I have a lot of deadlines on my calendar, which is the only thing that lives on this screen that I am gesturing to behind me for the people who can't see. I have an entirely separate, it's like a tablet that sits on my desk. It's its own screen, and it is just my Google Calendar, so that it is always there.
Entirely the calendar and the deadlines.
Only the calendar. Actually, that's not true. There's one more tab, which is my time tracking tab, but that's always in the background. I only go to it to stop time tracking. But, this is simply for time management. This entire screen I have dedicated to it, because otherwise somebody will ping me on Discord and they'll be like, hey, do you want to do this pirate dragon extravaganza where we're going to let you go wild making up like pirates who fly on dragons? And I'm like, oh, heck yeah, that sounds really cool. When are you? And they're like, it's a Kickstarter. And I'm like, okay, when are you launching the Kickstarter? They'll tell me, they'll be like, all right, July. And I'm like, do you need the text before the Kickstarter launches or after? Like, what's our timeline here? And they'll be like, oh, I need it in July. So I'll be like, okay, July. All right, well, July looks great, but that's when you need it. So let me go back. June looks like trash. I have 4 deadlines in June, so I already know that I shouldn't commit to something due at the beginning of July because it's right here. Otherwise, I'll be like, oh, heck yeah, that sounds great. And then later I'll go to my calendar and be like, oh, I fucked up.
That sounds like a very tight productivity tool that you've got there, like very refined. And I like that it's just clean, just like that is all that lives there is time.
Yeah.
I think that as someone who can get lost in many different projects on many different volumes, I think this is very related for any solo creator, because the more solo you are, the less someone else is going to edit this, someone else is going to catch this, someone else is going to be watching this clock. If the buck always is stopping at you every time, you better have some way of catching it.
And putting in your solo projects, especially in between something you might be working on collaboratively or whatever, is very hard because it's so tempting to be like, all right, I'm behind on my group project, so I'll just push this thing that I'm working on, my own passion project. And before you know it, you've pushed it and you've pushed it. And then you're like, I got 75% done with this 2 years ago. And it needs to be published. And you're like, but I've committed to 6 other projects this year. And, we're a couple of years into my creative cycle. So I know that I can reliably write, a 15,000 words product that's good, and then edit it and then get some layout, some, basic layout, because I'm not a graphic designer. So like, I know my limitations as well. I know where my skill set's at. And I know that it's going to take me at least a solid month. Like, so if I want to do nothing but that, I need to block out that whole month. Do we ever work on one project at once? I have ADHD and anxiety and, all of those other things. So no, I can't work on one project at once. I need a procrastination project in the background.
Oh, the procrastination project. Absolutely.
So I know that it's going to take me a time and a half. So I need to block out a month and a half. If I'm starting on it here, I need to set my deadline at least a month and a half out. And I know that that's feasible for me, myself, because, life and whatnot. And then I also, I know my own schedule around like when are conventions, when am I traveling, when are my family members' birthdays, important things like that too. You got to figure in, because it's very easy to forget that like, oh, my kid and my partner have their birthday in July. And so I shouldn't book every single day in July because what are you going to do? Not celebrate their birthday? No, that also feels terrible. So, managing your personal life commitments, your work-life balance. Most of us are doing this as a passion. I'm fortunate that I'm able to do TTRPGs as my full-time job. And
that, of course, brings extra responsibility.
That brings extra responsibilities of like feeling more beholden to, hitting deadlines, putting in as many projects as I can. But a lot of us, especially solo creators, we're doing this as a side hustle. And, that's what my primary partner, my husband, does as a side job. Like, so he has to, and, I did previously, we had to schedule it around, work projects, our day job. Yeah. And anyone with an office-y day job where we're doing kind of project-based work there knows that also is unpredictable. You think your schedule there, but you need to leave buffer. And that's hard to do because you want to cram in everything. And then we're pulling all-nighters, right? And it sounds like you pulled an all-nighter or two. How does that make you feel afterwards? Not great.
Yeah, and the accrued issues that come from that, and the emotional and physical ones. Me physically, with my back and sleep, and emotionally with, have you ever missed like something you'd rather be doing, or like an important family event or something like that, just because you really don't have it in the schedule for this thing you have to hit? And even if it's side hustle money, now a lot of us, side hustle money is a key part of what we have going on, or at the very least it gives us that breathing room. And if you're totally full time, you've totally in the drink. And I think most people work up to it in this sphere, to going full time. Yeah, it's unpredictable. You don't know what the tides of change are going to bring. You're never going to know when you have your boom cycle of a COVID happening, and you're never going to have your bust cycle of the fall off afterwards. We actually have a very pertinent question here from Eleanor Hingley, I feel.
Ooh, yeah.
Eleanor asks, how do you rekindle the joy in a project that you have got sick of or lost confidence in, which I think, as we can attest to here, in a professional setting, is life or death, because it doesn't matter what you think of it anymore when that thing's got a paycheck on it.
And that's a great question. So you talked about going back to kind of your first project, and I'd like to kind of go back to my very first project that I worked on, not quite all by myself. I was doing it to deliver to someone else, but I had to do all the thing, and then I just turned it over. So it essentially was a solo project. I was writing a 4-hour convention-ready D&D adventure for 5th edition, and I decided boldly that I wanted to do a mystery. First off, for a first-time adventure writer, I would not recommend that. Mysteries are hard.
They are.
Because you have to leave breadcrumb trails. You have to put so many options for your players. You need red herrings, but you need it to be clear. And so I spent months working on that. I never wanted to see that adventure again in my life. And then, of course, it came back across my plate because we needed to do revisions on it. So honestly, what rekindled my love of that project, it wasn't me at all. It was showing it to other people as an example of, this is my first project. It sucks. It's garbage. I hate it. And coming back and being like, I want to use this for our Halloween stream. So, a lot of it is getting that outside validation, getting some positive affirmation from your friends. And honestly, a big part of avoiding burnout that I hadn't gotten to yet, but Eleanor, great segue into this, is that it's okay to actively ask for validation. We might be, I want to hold it tight to my chest. I don't want to let everyone know what I'm working on. But as a solo creator, it is so important to have a support network to where you can be like, can you look at this? I kind of hate it right now. And you don't need to tell me if this is technically good, but can you tell me that it doesn't completely suck? And exactly, the mill brings up a good point there. That's a big part of why Rising Tides started, is so that we can be that support network for one another, to come in here and be like, hey, can somebody just let me know that somebody out there in the world likes this idea, and you'd probably buy it, right? And that gives you just that little bit of, you're doing something that's loosely inspired by my favorite anime. Oh my God, yes. I'm totally here for you. You haven't told me a lot more details, but it's going to be an adventure. And you said, I'm going to get to go to my favorite little setting. I mean, not exactly, right? Because licensing is a thing, but I'm going to feel like I'm, immersed in my favorite anime. Heck yeah. And, just hearing somebody be like, I also love this idea is often enough to be like, okay, cool. Back to the grind, unfortunately. But you're like, all right, somebody else is jazzed just about the concept. And that, is often like enough to really like push it forward. And that's a big reason too of why I was doing, and I really need to pick back up my own Twitch show, talking to other creators, the Designer's Den, where I talk to other creators about what is their design process, what's an adventure, a product, supplement, doesn't have to be adventure based. What's something that's been created, published out there in the world that they really are super jazzed about, and like what is it about that product that makes them go, I want to share this with the world? Because it's little things like that where like you're talking with them about other adventures or about how they do something, and you're like, I do that.
Absolutely.
And you're like, okay, and they're very happy. I can be happy, right? So just sharing in the community.
Absolutely. And RT is a wonderful community. I've had positive experience with that recently, but there's also a flip side that leads to my next question, because I had showed a group of people a layout that I had done, and I was trying to do a constant support thing for this exciting product we have, the specifics not being too important. And their main response was a mix of apathy and, wow, this is terrible, or you need to go learn some fundamentals. And on several levels, they were not wrong. However, I showed somebody else this being like, oh, it's terrible. And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. This would pass for a full page spread on any of these Kickstarters I backed. I'm looking forward to getting that printed in my hand. And that was a huge turnaround. And I found a big drag in advance in my life comes from how do we identify, one, that we're burning it all, but two, the right spaces to go for community, for validation, for feedback, and to basically get a net positive out of these interactions in these spaces.
And that's a great point too, Lee, is like, knowing which communities to go to seek your validation, and also knowing how to filter out constructive criticism from just like personal preference of, gosh, you're basing it on that anime? I'm not a big fan of that at all. So this is just garbage to me. Like, okay, cool. They don't like the concept at all. So anything that you put, no matter what change you're going to put out there, they're not going to be happy with it. That person isn't. There's no way you're going to please them. But, as with anything in life, it is literally impossible to please everyone. Like, you could make the most bomb macaroni and cheese in the world, and someone's going to hate it. Maybe they're just lactose intolerant.
Absolutely. I don't like noodles. Can you take the noodles out?
You just want a bowl of cheese, Lee? I mean, I'm down for that, by the way.
Yeah, no, but like
cheese.
You're never gonna make the mac and cheese that pleases the noodle hater. Meaning, you should not be like, oh, well, we've received feedback that indicates the noodles are negative. Ergo, we've solved the problem. Everyone must be happy. There's cheese now. No, you've actually displeased the original, your ideal audience, but ultimately there is that push to create something you don't even like anymore.
Yeah.
You can find yourself waking up one day working on something that's just, your heart's not in it, and there was a crossroads where you could have not been committed to this, and you chose to commit to it instead of circling back to what you love. And I guess I would say, how do you feel? Do you feel as solo creators? I have Pat. I have a great privilege in that I have Pat to lean on, so we're a duo. But as a solo creator, do you feel like you're at a unique risk of burning out? Do you feel like the way burnout impacts you stands apart from this broad? Because everyone feels it, but as a solo creator, how it hits you? There's
definitely a different feeling to it, right? Because if you're working as part of a gaming studio, for instance, wow, I feel really bad because I've literally just forgotten the entire name of the gaming company.
That happens. My memory is also...
I know. Let's see.
But you were working with them, and so you got that team experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely loved the experience of having a team, because this RT talk is absolutely not happening just as, Lee presents, right? This isn't a DJ. This is a RT talks. We have great support. There's a procedure. I haven't done the groundwork on so many aspects of this that would be all falling on my head. I would have been stressing about it on some level all week, but because there's a team here at Rising Tide and a great community here at Rising Tide, it's been able to be this handoff, and I get to feel how different it is to, all right, Lee, you better go cook that graphic and promote it in addition to making it great, in addition to yada, yada, yada. Whereas RT, I showed up and said, hello, and here we are.
Hello. Yeah. So my example that I was trying to go for here when I was just like mind blanking here was, so 2C Gaming, wonderful company, still totally sport. They've disappeared off the map right now because they ran into this exact problem. They're a team and they're working together, but even as a team, they managed to overcommit themselves. They had the Venture Matings Kickstarter. They had a series of other Kickstarters. They worked with, the Web DM team for Weird Wastelands. And all of these are fantastic products, but you still need to pace yourselves. And, even though they're an entire group and they're in the process of recovering from it, they were able to identify that, like, we have to pause here.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, none of us are going to work in this industry again because we're just going to be sick of it. So they pause, they're catching up with their backlog, and they're going to be great, but they all have each other to lean on. So it was a lot easier for them to make that decision of, like, should we push forward with another project, or should we let everyone know that we have a plan for the future, we're going to do more projects, but we need to stop for right now. And so, they all had each other to make that decision together. As a solo creator, it is definitely a lot harder to make that decision because you feel like you're disappointing your audience, who is, used to seeing regular releases from you if you've been able to do that, or that you're going to, diminish your brand because you're not constantly pushing yourself out there. And you don't even have to be actually doing like the creative bit of work, like the actual writing and designing, or, running your stream, whatever, your creative bit is. Sometimes the burnout comes from promoting yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
You get so tired of talking about your project. You might be super passionate about it. You might love it, but you're like, I never want to post another Kickstarter link about my own stuff in my entire life. Because then everybody's like, well, why should I back it? And you're like, all right, so you want me to toot my own horn and, like, okay, cool. I'm going to tell you what I love about it. And then you're going to be like, well, I don't like those things. And you're going to be like, okay, well, these are all of the things about it. Do you like any of those things? And people, you're advertising on social media, so you cast your net very wide. And again, back to you can't make a perfect macaroni. You can't make a perfect social media post or product that the entire web is going to love. So you get so inundated with criticisms that are not necessarily baseless, but often irrelevant. And it's hard to filter through all of that, especially when you're doing a big media push across multiple platforms, and especially right now, current day, when we don't even know what platform people are on.
Yeah, I mean, we have lists here, 12 social media sites. People are having to make a post on every single one and none of even the paid stuff won't cross you over all of them right now. Yeah.
I made a post about something while I was in the car on the way here, voting for a product that Steamforged Games has in the Innies. And I was like, okay, I posted it on Twitter. Hold on. I know you have a question for me, but hold on. I need to post this 6 more places before I forget what I'm doing.
Absolutely.
And that's a whole separate aspect of burnout as a solo creator, because you're the designer. You're oftentimes at least, one part of the editor. You should probably contract out at least a proofreading, but you're often doing some sort of editing on your own work, some sort of layout, even if it's just like, this are the pages that I want stuff on, and now I'm going to give it to the graphic person to make the pages look pretty. But you've still done some sort of layout to get everything in the right order and to be like, I want pictures here, 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 and here. So you're also the creative director, the project manager, the social media manager, the marketing manager, the finance manager. You're managing everything. And often those aren't even skills that you like.
Completely. When you look down sometimes at this list, when you look down and you're like, oh, I'm being paid to be a writer, and you look down at the actual list of responsibilities and what you're contributing, do you think that's a good diagnostic for burnout, that your rate should perhaps climb?
I think that's an excellent thing to consider when you're like, am I tired or am I burned out? It's like, how much work are you doing that's bringing you joy right now, right? And if it's none, then yeah, you have crossed the threshold. You have reached burnout. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You need to rest. You need to rest your body, and you need to rest your mind. It's the perfect time to binge some mindless TV at that point. Even though you feel like you're wasting your time, you're not. you cannot continue to be creative, like productively creative, originally creative, if you haven't given yourself time to rest.
Absolutely. Creative abilities are a class skill. You regenerate on a long rest. You need that rest.
Yeah, you're straight out of creative spell slots. And, we don't all have spell recovery. Not everyone's a warlock. And even if you are, you have less spell slots.
Yeah. Everyone has their own flow. And that in part makes it, because it's never going to happen in the universal time or look a universal way for us as creatives when we burn out. That makes the more esoteric questions about it even more difficult.
You can't schedule your burnout? I can't book that?
Yeah, exactly. I have a calendar. Can't I put it in there? So yeah. How would you define burnout even? Because this thing we all talk about already knowing, and yet it looks so different for all of us. How do you define burnout for you?
I think that is right. So burnout is where you've reached that point of exhaustion. What does that exhaustion look like to you? Does it look like, maybe it looks like you're just like physically, you just cannot, like all you can do is like lay there because your body is just like, no, we're done here. Okay. Because you've physically overworked yourself running around doing too much. Or it can look like, opening up any document that you're working on. Maybe you've got 12 works in progress. You open them all up and you're like, I hate this. You open up social media and you're like, no, you don't want to talk to your friends. You don't want to talk about any projects. You don't even want to think about taking on another project. Somebody messages you and they're like, hey, it's short notice, but next week a spot has opened and I know this is like your dream project, working with your dream company. And you're like, yeah, you start to dread it. Yeah. Like you could get an offer for your dream project at that point, but you're just like, yes, I want to do it, but and that really for me is like when I know that I've reached that point of like not just burnout, but like extreme burnout, when like I don't even want to think about taking on another project. I don't want to look at a thesaurus. I don't want to look at a Word document. I don't want to hear your pitch for your greatest thing, and I don't even want to hear about your character or your D&D game. Like honestly, at that point, like extreme burnout for me is like I'd like to not think about gaming at all.
Yeah.
Tabletop gaming. Anyways, maybe it's time to like dive headfirst into Zelda or Diablo for 2 weeks and just like not.
Absolutely. I was wary at first about doing video game streams, but they're so regenerative in a way to be in a different stream. But it's a whole consideration because it's this growing embers and the fire is rising. I guess this raises the question of when you realize, like, I'm burning out. I'm beginning to get there. It's not getting good. I don't yet hate gaming, but I know if I keep on like this, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
How do you pivot? How do you avoid in that moment? Number one is, of course, saying no. But you're in the middle of the flow and you're not at the junction point, just generally the day-to-day. How do you avoid burnout?
You've already got the projects. It's not about saying no anymore. You've already taken too many, but you're not quite there, right? Mm-hmm. You're starting to get frazzled with everything. You're like, I've got to do this and then I got to do that. And you're just like a little exhausted, a little tired. Honestly, then it comes down to prioritizing. I am a big fan of to-do lists. I have an entire notebook that is specifically for to-dos. This is a spiral notebook flipped from the top, things to do, it says. And it has check boxes built right into it so that I can feel accomplished. And you want to break it down into very small chunks, because the best way to avoid burnout, because it's all the chemicals and everything in our brains that are pushing us to that point, is to get that little hit of dopamine, right? So if it's as much as like, okay, so let's go back to talking about social media promotion, right? So we're promoting ourselves. Mm-hmm. So to make a social media promotion, there are multiple steps.
Absolutely.
I need to gather the pertinent details. That's one thing. Once you've done that, you can check that one off. I have them all and I know exactly what they are. I need to put together some templates. So I use Canva. Mm-hmm. I love Canva. It makes everything super easy. I don't have to think about getting a graphic designer. I just put assets together, put together my templates, and I've picked out my templates. That's another one we can check off. Put them together, put your pictures on them, So once I've got them all assembled, that's the third thing. And then schedule the post out. So obviously you need text to go with your post. So there's putting together a few versions of the post. So we'll go, with an example, like tonight, short chats about burning, join us in the audience. you could phrase that same thing 6 different ways, minor changes, so you're not making the exact same post over and over again, because if you're doing that, people stop reading it.
Absolutely. And you're asking yourself, is the algorithm rewarding this right now? Is the algorithm not? What am I seeing succeed? Should I go look at other people's?
Yeah. So, you could have one bullet point, check mark, task item for create and schedule. But there are so many steps there that you could get I played World of Warcraft for way too many years in college, and we can't deny the reason it was so popular is every little quest. We're all like, yeah, yeah, I turned it in, I did it, yeah. And like some of them are, collect 5 fish. Okay, collect 5 fish is part of a quest line. You collect your fish, then you talk to this person, and then you bring them the fish scales, and then you go back and you talk to this person. Each of those is a separate quest in your quest line, right? Why can't we do that with our own life? So sometimes it's about tricking yourself into, project planning the simulator, except it's not a simulation. Obviously, we're living in the simulation.
Oh, yeah.
And being able to recognize that, we're at the point where I need to stop. I need to take a step back. I need to prioritize. I need to write down my list of, what needs to be done. And then I need to see, if these are projects that I'm doing, am I trying to tie them to some book release that's coming out? So that's a hard deadline. Is this a project that I have a turnover to another company? That's maybe a hard deadline. You don't know until you ask. Hey, company, can I get an extension of even just a weekend? An extra weekend goes so far. Can I get an extension? I generally ask for a week, knowing that I'm perfectly happy with a weekend. Shoot for the moon so you can land among the stars, as it goes. And so, going to them and asking them, can I get these extensions? Maybe you don't need all of the buffer time that you're asking for, but just having it
Absolutely
brings that anxiety level down to a dull roar where you're like, okay, I have the wiggle room. My general go-to there is, even when I get the extensions, I don't update them on my calendar.
Yeah.
Like, I'll write down on a piece of paper, extension granted for project name, and then write the new date down, but it is over here separate from my calendar, because if I put it here, I have a new deadline. My ADHD brain is like, the deadline's not yet. We can wait.
Oh, absolutely.
But I see my original deadline. I'm still working towards it, while knowing in the back of my brain that I got some buffers I asked for. Those are there. And so, when it gets down to that deadline, if I'm not quite to a polished state that I want, I can crack open my other book and be like, they did give me an extension. So let me table this one for tonight, because it's just making me mad right now because I can't find the word that I want. It's generally something as silly as that. I can't find the word that I need to finish this NPC block. I want to describe her, but I don't want to keep saying she's spunky.
Absolutely.
I need there's an adjective I'm looking for, but I haven't found it yet. Those are some tricks that I do, and a lot of it is just about tricking your own mind into being like, things are going well, things are fine. I like these projects. Until you can get back into a space where you've got some breathing room and you can go back into all right, I've started on this project, I'm not really feeling it, and get back into that cycle of early on in the project being like, hey, support group, am I going in a completely wrong direction, or does this seem like a fine idea? And you're back to that original point that we talked about with starting out on the right foot, right? With requesting that validation early and often.
It does all tie back into this thesis you have of flow control. Give yourself a space. Understand you're not always going to be running on 100, and if you are, that's when the rubber starts to smell and you're burning out. Yeah,
and Clay over here in the chat of RT Talks, tricking yourself into believing something that is actually true. And yeah, honestly, that's a lot of what it is. As our brain gremlins in there are usually our worst critics, and they're like, you're not going to make this deadline, it's not going to be good, no one's going to like it, you shouldn't have taken this project, whatever. When you got your validation early on, probably, confirming with someone that I think I'm going to write this 60-page supplement on various candies that you can get from the Feywild and why you shouldn't eat any of them.
But you want to.
You know, by the way, I just came up with that on the spot. So if that's an idea anyone likes, it's yours. I don't have time for that.
Really?
So, you know, like whatever it is, you think of this thing and, you know, someone's like, yeah, there's no book on candies in the Feywild, and everyone knows you don't take food from the Fey. But everyone also knows that taking candy from a stranger is a trope for a reason. So, you know, you're like, so they're like, yeah, this project has merit. So you did that, you know, way back on, and, you know, you got to that point where you're like, stupid again, whatever. And you've gotten back to, you know, getting that validation and knowing that, like, all right, you know, I've tricked myself and, you know, I've done all of this and I've started getting the marketing together, got my, you know, tiny little incremental things that I'm doing. And then, you know, given myself a buffer and gone back to another project, came back and been like, candy, heck yeah. And you're like, okay, I like this. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's definitely having fresh eyes for something. For myself, when I come back to fiction, I'm like, what was I doing? When I come back to a game design, I was like, damn, I was cooking. So I definitely think that we all have a different relation to it, but fresh eyes are really big, particularly when you're editing, to be able to have a remove from it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have, for those of you unaware, if you want to have questions for us, we come up with the question portion, RT discussion. We're about to get into those, but before we do, so we've gone over a lot in this talk. Ginny has a lot of great experience and knows a lot about this because Ginny, you've made a career of this.
Experienced it personally.
You've got the experience. You've had the good. You've had the bad.
Yeah.
Now we've talked about what to do to avoid it at all. What to do to pull up when you're going down. What happens when you crash? When you have actually is like. Is there any special thing that you think is beyond the techniques we already discussed of like, okay, it's happened. You hate gaming. Totally. Something has gone very wrong in terms of a deadline and you aren't taking on new projects and they're stalled out. When you are burnt functionally, is there a recovery method or path that you look towards or envision that is distinct from just avoiding burnout in general? Or is it always that back and forth of you have an amount of burnout, you're lowering it?
I mean, yeah, like you said, there's the you know, avoiding it entirely, which is a separate skill set from recovering from it, right? And, you know, once you've reached that point, I mean, you've reached it, right? You walked off the cliff. And if anyone's ever tried to climb a cliff, it's very sheer and difficult. So, you know, honestly, sometimes, generally, when we've reached burnout, we've walked off the cliff into a nice, gentle river. It's down at the bottom. So, you know, let's take this analogy and run with it. The best thing to do often is to just not for a bit. Like, you're burnt out for a reason. You did too much. And I know it's hard to give ourselves that break because we want to stay marketable. We want to stay relevant. We want to stay in the loop. We want to keep working. We loved the work, right? You're like, I loved this last week. I should still love it. You're punishing yourself. I should, right? I should love it. Yeah, I mean, sure, maybe, sure, whatever. Maybe you should. But, like, you know, that's just like, I, you know, should drink 8 glasses of water a day. But
it ain't always gonna happen.
I ain't doing that either, am I? You know, so it's okay. It's good even to like you said, switch to something else for a little bit. If it's tabletop RPG design that you're burnt out on, maybe write a little short fiction. Maybe go back. Maybe you love poetry. Maybe take a week and write some poems. Yeah. You know, you could put those in your games later.
You can, and rediscover that lost love.
Yeah. Everything that you're doing in your downtime, like, you might feel like you're being unproductive if you're taking it, you're binge watching, you know, what people would consider trash TV. Trash TV has very great, like, narrative and storylines stuff buried in it generally.
That writer pumped that out on a deadline, and they did well enough that is their bread and butter. So there are things to learn there.
It got aired, right? Yeah. So you can draw your inspiration from the most unlikely places. Maybe you take a month and you don't. Maybe your thing is streaming actual plays. Maybe you take a month and you stream your favorite nostalgic childhood video games.
Yes.
And you're like, this is like so low. I mean, low pressure, right? But also, like, let's go back to the games that my age group played as children. They are so hard.
Yeah, I did return to Morrowind as mine, so there was some difficulty up there at front, but no, just like getting back into something, feeling it out, thinking, what do I like, what don't I like, what is there? I literally, when I take walks, right, I will look out and think, battle maps don't display the reality of this foliage. How do I make a top-down 2D display that would make me feel like D&D characters walking through this and like, it gets me going, it gets me thinking, it gets me mapping again, it gets me building the battle maps again. So I totally think you can look to anything for inspiration in life.
Or even it can be as easy as like, you're going through, you're playing Sonic, you're playing Mario, and you're like, man, Mario, Sonic, Luigi, even if you were always player 2, they die over and over again. They fail constantly. They can't find their princess. They can't beat the Eggman. So they start over.
They come back
at the very beginning because you can't save. And that's fine. Sometimes what you need to do when you've burnt out is chuck the whole thing. Chuck it. Put it in not necessarily the trash, right? Chuck it in a drawer somewhere. Come back to it in a couple weeks, months, years. That project, you've written that bit. It's not just going to disappear into the abyss unless you like permanently delete it. And that's a choice you can also make.
I wouldn't recommend it, but yes. You can toss it out. As we come here towards the end, as we approach the listener questions, we know that the overall takeaway is say no. Say no to avoid the burnout. We have all of these wonderful messages that have been elucidated on avoiding it, recognizing it, recovering if you've gone all the way, which I think is very important to point out. It's a separate skill. Finishing things in general is a separate skill from just the flow of making them. And there's all these things to develop, and as a solo creator, you're going to have to master many, even the ones you don't like. What would you say what would you want anyone to take away from this in addition to saying no? Is anyone who's worried or thinking about burnout and creative pursuits?
In addition to saying no, like obviously you want to have an entire support group, but I guess you'd kind of call it your right-hand man, your ride or die, whatever. You want to have that one person who you can go to who is going to not necessarily, I hate the phrase brutally honest, because why do we need brutality, but who is going to be very straightforward with you and not only tell you their opinion about the product, right, that you're working on currently, whatever it may be, whatever form of media it is, but also look at you and be like, hey, Jenny, I know you said you just got an offer for another project, but please, for the love of everything, look at your calendar once more. No, look at it again.
Yeah.
Do you really have time? And you're like, yeah, we're coming into summer. Okay, what else are you planning on doing this summer? Well, I've got, 6 conventions. And how long does it take you to recover physically from a convention? Okay, you've got a good point.
Absolutely.
You got a good point. So you got to find, that person. It doesn't have to be, a real life friend. Many of us have those internet friends where you can message them and be like, should I take another project? And they're like, well, when is it due? And you're like, end of summer. And they're like, no, you shouldn't. You're like, but, and then you tell them, well, but it's my favorite IP. And they're like, ask them if it can be due later then.
Yeah.
That person who's just going to like real talk and be like, you got to say no. You gotta.
Absolutely. You need to say no. You need to find the person who's going to tell you to say no. And all of this is just part of the community experience and the network that we build as solo creators, because even though we are solo creators, we're not an island. Yeah, you've been a well of insights, Jenny, and I feel like we could go all night.
But we got a lot of really good questions.
We do. We have these questions coming in. I want to cast the net out and begin to go over them. Clay has a question.
Okay.
I'm curious y'all's thought on building a following in early stages. I get tired of posting everything, like you're mentioning, and I find much better to make posts in one platform than 5. And where do you find the balance of platforms? And I assume not just balance of platforms, but the life balance of how do I avoid burning out when I have to promote?
That's a great question. Like you said, if we're posting individually to everything, we're trying to, make a bespoke post for Twitter or Facebook, whatever. Yeah, that's tiring. I don't do that. Building a following in your early stages, it's very difficult, right? Because you really need to, more important even than putting out the best content in the world, is being consistent in your early stages. And by that, you don't have to be constantly creating. You need to be constantly contributing. And I think that's an important distinction, right? Because if you're constantly posting what is perceived as ads for your work, then people are going to see that like you're just shilling your own stuff. Maybe they're going to get tired of seeing you. But you can remain relevant and get a following for being a knowledgeable person in the community, a helpful person, a supportive person Rising Tide here is a great example. You're tired of posting all of your stuff. One, how do you find that balance of platforms? You got to kind of find your home, like you say, where you're gonna participate in discussions. You're gonna be more active there, and like that's your one thing, right? And then maybe for every other social media platform that you feel is relevant to your particular thing, or that you might have an audience on, automate that junk.
Yeah.
With Canva, I can schedule it out on any platform that I can link into it. With Meta Business Tools, you can schedule it out for your Facebook page, your Facebook profile, your Instagram page, your story, your Instagram Reels, your all of that. You can schedule all of that in that one business suite. It is really annoying to use. I'm not going to lie. Most of them are. But find the automation tool that works for you. Some people are even more tech savvy and create their own scripts to do stuff. And I applaud those people for automating, for taking the time to create a thing that makes other parts of their work easy for them. If there's something that you don't like doing and there is an easy option to automate it, I highly recommend that. But Clay, find your home. You're not wrong. Find your home.
Yeah, find your home, automate the rest. Building a tool, though, relates to Penny Penguin's question, which is, what's your opinion on people making games for themselves that help them avoid burnout? I presume you mean literally like not a procrastination project, although that's worth bringing up again, but literally a game relating to burnout.
Yeah. They did point out a little further down that I answered the question. So I think it was like kind of a bit that gamification bit is what pending data meant. And if that's not what you meant, pending data, then do chime in again. But, I feel very favorably about gamifying whatever you need to in your life to make it manageable for you. And honestly, all right, parenting, for example, right? If you're online and you're looking at self-help for parenting things, a lot of the stuff they recommend is gamifying stuff for your children. Gamify those chores, gamify those, educational goals. Like, make it something that you want to engage with, because that's how you trick your brain into being like, oh yeah, I gotta go do the thing. Like, oh, I gotta go make this Twitter post today. I'm gonna make an Instagram reel, and I'm super excited about it because I'm gonna check it off on my list.
Yeah, count up your points at the end.
Yeah, and also I just had this really cool idea for what I'm gonna wear in my Instagram reel. So I'm really jazzed to do it right now. So gamify it. Yes, my opinion is very positive on that.
And we have one more question here from the DMV. So we're not going to have to wait into too many lines to get the DMV's question this time, though, thankfully. Unlike when I go get my license renewed.
Oh.
Does refilling your creative bank help avoid or recover from burnout? So they talk about taking in media and life experiences. We've talked about that as being a way to recover. But I guess there is also that question of, we've talked about junk TV, we've talked about going on walks, we've talked about doing fun stuff. But if we go out and we find challenging art and challenging experiences, that in a sense, I guess that's the question is, does that help avoid or recover from burnout? Or can that be in its own way a weight of you just finished Evangelion and you're like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, I think it can absolutely be both. Switching up your forms of media, playing in a long-term campaign or short-term campaign, whatever it is, watching an actual play, playing a video game, watching TV, reading novels, reading fan fiction, reading short stories online, reading a bunch of Wikipedia articles, because I have a feeling I'm not the only one here who randomly does that.
Yeah, going so deep.
Yeah, the rabbit holes. There's so many rabbits out there. But, all of that, it not only helps you, stay refreshed mentally to avoid that burnout, but it puts you back in that state of inspiration to climb back out of that hole, as I was earlier, that river, to helps you find your canoe. The paddle's optional.
Absolutely. Paddle optional canoe. Sometimes you're in the canoe, you just lay out, you let your hands run through the creative milieu. Absolutely. And how do you prioritize which projects to take on and which ones to say no to, Domio asks, in terms of you have two equally weighted projects, or they're equally going to take time, but you've got to prioritize now. You can't say no to yes to both.
Yeah, that is always an interesting problem, right? Because oftentimes it's a timing situation, right? So you get an offer for a project. We'll say, you get an offer in the spring for projects due at the end of summer. It's a pretty big project. So you want to devote a healthy amount of time to it. And then you're like, my calendar's open. Everything's great here. I have enough time. You say yes. And then 2 weeks later, you get an offer and they're like, hey, we're going to do this little supplement. It's maybe a much smaller scope of project even. We're just gathering the writers now. We're not going to really start it till midsummer. Your contribution's kind of small. And you're thinking to yourself, oh, small, right? Yeah, small. I could squeeze this in. You got to go back. No. I already blocked like whole time for big project. And then they're like, and it's based on your favorite IP. Like a lot of times prioritizing comes down to, when did you get the offer?
Yeah.
If you're getting a lot of offers, one, congratulations.
Yeah, good sign.
You made it. You made it. But even if you think that they're like nothing burger offers, right? You're getting offers from your DM Guild friends, your Twitter friends to like, hey, do you want to design this monster with me? That's an offer, my friend. You got it. You got 7 of those. You got 7 people who believe in you to do work. But anyways, I digress. It comes down to timing a lot of times. I've already committed. I'm not going to go back on that commitment and leave the first person in a hole of having to find an all new person that fits their project, that can now do it on an expedited timeline, because now 2 weeks have gone. That's 2 weeks this new person wouldn't have.
You don't want to say anything that's going to damage your reputation or turn them off of you. That's part of why remember Ginny's advice. Tell them, can we move this? Can we move the timetable? I would love to do this with you.
And, I get the scenario that I'm giving out here where I got that thing offered 2 weeks later, and they're like, it's due essentially exactly when the big project was due. I told them, I said, I am so excited that you thought about me. And they were like, well, we saw you post about this IP, and like you were like, and I was like, yeah, exactly, because I love it. And they're like, yeah, we remembered that, and so we thought you'd really want to be involved. And I was like, I do, but unfortunately, the timeline you've given me, it doesn't work for me. I was very upfront. I was like, I have this other project. It's due. It was due at the end of June. And I was like, I don't know how flexible your timeline is. I know that you're saying all the other authors are going to be starting here, blah, blah, blah. So it's a collaborative project. So feel free to tell me to take a hike. But is there any way I could start 3 weeks later? And then I am willingly telling you at that point that you're giving everyone else 4 weeks to write, and I want 3. Can I start it 2 weeks later and take a week less time to do it, knowing that, the scope of the project is still feasible for me in that shortened time frame? 4 weeks would have been great. I would have had so much time. Yeah. But 3 is still very reasonable. Is that feasible, do you all think? And they're like, well,
maybe.
Had we not worked with you before on something, did we not know you're like, you're going to get it done? Like, But they were like, we have. And so, yeah, we're willing to be a little bit flexible, but there will be no extensions. And I was like, there will be no extensions. Yeah. Noted, understood.
Yeah. Reputation, trust go a long way.
So, that worked out.
It did.
That worked out to where I didn't have to prioritize. But, sometimes you have to say no, because they're like, no, hard deadline, Kickstarter launching. We need to have that particular bit in layout because we want to put it as a promo on the Kickstarter page. And you're like, no, can't do it then.
Yeah. Let it be known, if you want a freelancer, early and often. You reach out early and often if you want a freelancer, because especially if you're making the bread, you're making the cheddar, you got to have months lined up, because you do not want to be left casting the line wondering where the next G's are. Yeah.
And that's something too that people were always like laughing when I was scheduling out my guests for my podcast, my show. They were like, you want to book me for something 4 months out? And I'm like, yes.
Yes. Oh, yes. And that's much better than having to scramble each week.
Not for your sake, but I need to book you 4 months out for my sake. I have 4 months of people. And then I have these people who said maybe, who I'm going to call if any of these people are like, something came up.
Absolutely. But speaking of time and buffers here and how we've arranged it, we've entered into the 5-minute over grace period. And Ginny has been a wonderful font of knowledge and lore. Ginny, where can the good people find you and more of your wisdom?
It is super easy to find me. You can find me online under @Ginny Loveday on pretty much all of the social media pages, every single one, with the exception of Pinterest, that pending data posted. You can find me, well, not Reddit either. Reddit's a cesspool that I try to avoid. But you can find me on all of those. My website also. Please, I also have a Discord, which is listed on my website. So feel free to reach out. Love to chat with people. I'm always down to help. I'm on this Discord now. I'm really terrible about checking Discord. So if you ping me there, I'll get back to you. I will. I'm not ignoring you. I promise you. Especially during the summer, I'm traveling. But same with all of those, really. Feel free to reach out. You're not a bother. You're just, we're prioritizing further down the line, maybe.
Absolutely.
but I do love to chat with other creators, to help people. That's something I'm very passionate about. So I am so excited to be here today, and thank you for having me on.
It's been wonderful.
And thank you everyone for the questions.
Yes.
These were absolutely wonderful questions.
Yes. Do check RT Discussion for the various links to Ginny's accounts. And I will say, a great pleasure in feeling recovered from my burnout, perhaps a little. I'm Lee, and this has been RT Talks. Join us live in our Discord for our next event, Defining Your Creative Process with Ashley Warren, coming up on July the 24th, 6 p.m. Eastern, or catch it in podcast form, which this talk will also be available in. All right. This is my first RT Talk, so I don't actually know if I'm supposed to end the stage or not, or if we're just chilling, but it's been wonderful, everyone. Everyone did a great job.
You gotta go with, and that's it for today, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now.
That's it for now, folks. Absolutely. You've done great. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much, Ginny. This has been definitely something that I think is on everyone's minds, and A+ topic, A+ conversation.
Thanks, Lee. And the DMV, I'm going to answer that other question that you had. I'll text it in the chat there so everyone else can see the answer.
Ooh, check out the discussion.